ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। So in today's session, we'll be concluding our discussion on Socrates. So today we will discuss the last days of the man who in his lifetime, that is 469 to 399 BC, was an enigma, an inscrutable individual who, despite having written nothing, is considered one of the handful of philosophers who forever changed how philosophy itself is to be conceived, and whose influence has been felt far beyond philosophy itself through all these years. So last time we had discussed some of his teachings, and I will just a summary of why he was special in his teachings. I will just share the photograph slide. So here you can see so he forever changed how philosophy is to be conceived and was the first to give a practical and political focus to philosophy and ethics. He was among the first moral philosophers, never wrote down any of his teachings, and always insisted that he was not a teacher. And his method of teaching was exceptional. He taught through dialogues, a kind of interrogation which tries to find out more about the other person's understanding of moral issues. And since he had written down nothing, we have as his only sources those who came after him, those who were close to him. Plato, of course, was his disciple, and Xenophon. So all which we get about Socrates is primarily derived from these two sources. So last time we had discussed in detail what does Socrates mean by philosopher, what does he mean by philosophy, all these terms. And we had seen what were his definitions of virtue and what according to him would be the perfect city state, where everybody will be content with life and justice and not power and some whimsical notion of some dictator. Not all that, but justice will be the deciding factor of all the matters of the state. But how can that be possible? Socrates gives a unique answer, which was it was astounding that he thought of that in those times. This can only be done, he said, if the state is ruled by a person who is highly educated, has a passion for learning of all kinds. This means he's a very, very cultured person. And most important, he has achieved the understanding of the form of the good. So what is the good, ultimate good? We have already discussed last time, so we won't go into that. The most important thing is, in a perfect city state, the king has to be a philosopher. So the special meaning which he attached to this term, we have already seen last time. So he said, first, what is virtue? This means, according to him, what should be the basis of morality and what is the ideal city state. Now, in those times, no topics could have been more vital, more important to the young Athenians of that generation. These are very burning issues of the day, because what had happened was the sophists had destroyed the faith these youths had once in all the gods and goddesses, various gods and goddesses of Olympus, and in the moral code that had taken its sanction so largely from the fear which men had for these innumerable gods. Don't do this, don't do that. Why? Oh, some god will punish you. He will make your life hell. So, that is the only basis. So, if there was no fear, it means that there would be no morality. That was the result. So, at that time, what had happened was a transition period. So, these youths now had lost their faith in the gods. Oh, gods, who has seen the gods? Maybe it is just a superstition. So now, apparently, there was no reason why a human being should not do as he pleased. Because who can prove the existence of gods, let alone what justice he will deliver when? Nobody knows. So do as you please, because the fear has gone. So, as long as you remain within the law, do what you please. And somehow, if you can evade the law without being detected, then it's all the more better. So, it has been put very nicely, a disintegrating individualism had weakened the Athenian character. No basis. See, a man, if he is only governed by fear, so when the source of the fear is gone, then who is there to restrain him? All self-control, all morality, the source should be something higher. So, all control should be voluntary. It cannot be imposed. It can be imposed for 1 day, 2 days, 1 year. After that, what will happen? So, this was one side, this disintegrating individualism. And to make matters worse, the political situation was absolutely chaotic. When we see the details, we will see it was absolutely unbelievable. Such was the chaos. Now, to understand, see, first, for the reason of Socrates' death, we have to understand the political situation which existed at that time. And to understand the political situation, first of all, we have to know the meaning, the context in which these two terms were used. We are familiar with these two terms, but there's a special context in ancient Greece. What were the two terms? First is democracy. Second is aristocracy. Now we will read again and again, we will see later that Socrates denounced democracy. He denounced. Why? Because the meaning of that at that time, what was known as democracy was absolutely ridiculous. We will see. That's why Socrates propounded aristocracy. So aristocracy, as we generally know, is not commendable. But there is a special meaning attached to the term. So before we know these terms, in what context they are used, we cannot understand the political situation which existed in those times. Now, first, democracy. The Greek idea of democracy was different, very different from the present day democracy, because in Athens in those times, all adult citizens were required to take an active part in the government. It is not that you have to belong to some political party or you have to be interested in politics. No. You have to take an active part in the government, in the policies of the government. Now, because of this strange rule, the officials of the democracy were in part elected by the assembly and in large part chosen by lottery in a process called sortition. Just imagine, maybe you have put 200 names. Who will be the Prime Minister? Take out one name. So each year, 500 names, 500 were chosen from all the citizens of ancient Athens. Just lottery. Nobody knows what kind of person he is. He may be absolutely uneducated. Nobody knows. So those 500 citizens had to actively serve. There was no choice. They had to actively serve in the government for 1 year. During that year, these persons who were elected in such a strange way, they were responsible for making new laws. Just imagine. And controlled all parts of the political process. Some may be a gardener, some may be a cook, some may be a shoemaker, nobody knows. So this was the democracy, which naturally any rational person would denounce. And Socrates denounced that. On the other hand, Socrates recommended aristocracy. So that also meaning is completely different from what we understand today. Aristocracy, as conceived by the philosopher Aristotle, it meant that the rule of the few, like we have today, the rule of the few who were morally and intellectually superior to others, they would form the government. They would make the decisions. And they would govern in the interest of all, not for their own selfish interest. That can never happen totally, but at least these people were above the common man in their maturity, their experience, their ability to govern. All these things were there. That was what aristocracy meant. So naturally, Socrates, we will see, he recommended that. So, what was the type of government in Athens? It was democracy. We have seen what democracy meant. And naturally, it was a very, very strange type of government. I mean, it is almost unbelievable. So now I will quote Will Durant at length and just see his language. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable. How anybody can write like that? So he says, of the 400,000 inhabitants of Athens at that time, I want you to concentrate on each word now. 400,000 inhabitants, 250,000 were slaves. Yeah. They did not have any political right of any kind. And what was left? 150,000 citizens. So only a small number of these 150,000 presented themselves at the General Assembly. where the policies of the state were discussed and determined. Yet, what democracy they had was as thorough as never since. Hmm. The General Assembly was the supreme power and the highest official body, the Supreme Court. Hmm. So actually, it is sarcasm when Durant says what democracy they had was as thorough. It is a sarcasm. Why? Because the highest official body, the Supreme Court, consisted of over 1,000 members. Then he says in brackets to make bribery expensive. You can bribe one man, two men, you can't bribe 1,000 men. So, and what this Supreme Court of 1,000 men consisted of, we cannot even imagine. What was the method of selection? It was selected by alphabetical rote from the roll of all citizens. A, those who start the name with A, okay, take 100 of them. Yeah. So that is why Durant says no institution could have been more democratic nor more absurd. Now, naturally, any rational man would see how stupid this system was. So, too stupid even to believe now. So, that is why, seeing all this, Socrates said that if knowledge, we have seen that he equated virtue with knowledge. So he said if knowledge is the highest excellence, this type of democracy is nonsense. So aristocracy is the best form of government, where the few cultured people, few knowledgeable people would rule, keeping the interests of all the citizens in mind. So Socrates said it is absurd to choose magistrates by lot, where no one would dream of drawing lots for a pilot, a mason, a flute player, or any craftsman at all. See, suppose you want a pilot. Will you have a lottery? Pick one name and he should go and fly an aeroplane. If you want an architect, will you do this by lottery? So all these things we won't do by lottery, Socrates said, though the shortcomings of such men are far less harmful. If a person who does not know how to fly is picked up, what will happen? A plane will crash. But here, these people who know nothing about governing, they are making the policies of the state. So what can be more harmful? So he condemns this type of democracy and also condemns the litigiousness. Litigiousness means at that time anything happens, go to the court. Litigation was a favorite thing. Anything happens, go and sue. So he condemns this and also the envy which Athenians had of one another and the bitterness of their political factions and disputes. All these he criticized, Socrates. So he also said, I am constantly in the greatest fear lest some evil should happen to the state too great for it to bear. When this kind of practically you can say madness is going on, anything can happen. These people can declare war against anybody. They can ruin the state. So Socrates said, I am always afraid. So he said, nothing could save Athens except government by knowledge and ability. This is natural. And this was more to be determined by voting than the qualifications of a pilot, a musician, a physician, or a carpenter. So, just as if we want someone to be a doctor, we appoint someone as a doctor. So, we just don't pick a name at random. We see the qualification. So, Socrates said that when for all other things qualifications are required, then why not for the most important thing of all, which is the governing of the state? So he said qualifications of the persons should be the only criteria, nothing else. And he said, nor should power or wealth choose the officials of the state. Not because somebody is very rich, he should become a member of the assembly or something like that. Not at all. Tyranny and plutocracy are as bad as this kind of democracy. He said, if the person turns out to be tyrant, or he just gets the post because he is wealthy, then it will be no good, no better than this type of democracy. Because he is also actually not qualified. So he said, what is to be done? We should have an aristocracy in which office would be restricted to those who are fit and trained for that. You are fit, then you receive proper training. Then you go and hold the post, not before. So, he said, this type of government, this type of democracy is absolutely stupid. So again, I will quote from Bill Durant, just see the language. What could have been more ridiculous than this mob-led, passion-ridden democracy, this government by a debating society, this precipitate selection and dismissal and execution of generals. Catch anybody? Execute. This unchoiced choice of simple farmers and tradesmen. They are governing the state. They should be tilling the land. So, this unchoiced choice of simple farmers and tradesmen in alphabetical rotation as members of the Supreme Court of the land. What could be more ridiculous? How could a new and natural morality be developed in Athens? That was his quest. New plus natural morality. Morality which did not depend on the fear of gods. How could it be developed in Athens, and how could the state thus be saved? And again I quote, just see the sentence. It was his reply to these questions that gave Socrates immortality as well as death. Just see each word, such a beautiful way of putting it. These questions, because he answered, Socrates is immortal, because his replies were so outstanding. But his answers did not please everybody. That was the cause of his trial and death also. So what happened was, all types of people, all types in the sense, the majority of the people were antagonized in some way or the other by Socrates. Now, older citizens of Athens, they would have honored Socrates had he tried to restore the ancient faith, which gods and goddesses, all that. So, the older people were actually so accustomed to that anybody who says that no, you don't have to believe in any god to be moral, they would have said it is a blasphemy. So older citizens would have tolerated him or maybe even honored him had he tried to restore that ancient faith in gods. If he had led his band of emancipated souls to the temples and sacred groves and bade them sacrifice again to the gods of their fathers, then they would have felt, yeah, this fellow is in the tradition. Yeah. But Socrates knew that this was a hopeless and suicidal policy. This would be going backwards. He had his own religious faith. It is not that he was an atheist. He believed in one God, and he knew that a lasting moral code could not be based upon so uncertain a theology. So each sentence you just see. Such, if we want people to be moral, we want them to be moral all the time, not for a few days. So there has to be a lasting moral code. Now, how can the moral code be lasting, far reaching, if it is based on such flimsy premises? Believe in that God, otherwise that God will destroy you. If that belief in that God is gone tomorrow, then your morality also goes with that. So such flimsy basis, how can it be? That's why he says a lasting moral code could not be based on so uncertain a theology. Now just see what Bill Durant says. Very important. See the language. If one could build a system of morality absolutely independent of religious doctrine, which was as valid for the atheist as for the pietist, those who are considered to be pious, then theologies might come and go. Then no problem. Theologies might come and go without loosening the moral cement that makes of willful individuals the peaceful citizens of a community. Just see the language. What is the moral cement? What is the deciding factor of our morality, which makes of willful individuals, those who are independent, how to make them peaceful citizens of community? What is the cement which binds that? He says that we have to build a system of morality which is absolutely independent of this flimsy faith in all these gods and goddesses. See how wonderfully he has put it. Now again, just see each sentence. He says, if for example, good means intelligence, if good meant intelligence and virtue meant wisdom, if men could be taught to see clearly their real interests, to see afar the distant results of their deeds, to criticize and coordinate their desires out of a self-cancelling chaos into a purposive and creative harmony. This, he said, perhaps would provide for the educated and sophisticated man the morality which in the unlettered person relies on reiterated precepts and external control. So this sentence is very complex. We don't have the time. I would just ask you to again hear that afterwards if you want. So he said, Socrates, perhaps all sin is error. Perhaps it is just a matter of error. So perhaps all sin is just error. partial vision or foolishness. So just get rid of that foolishness of the man. Just make him aware of his error. He won't do anything wrong. That is all. The intelligent man may have the same violent and unsocial impulses as the ignorant man. Now, these impulses can come to the intelligent man as well as the ignorant man. But Socrates says the intelligent man will control them better and slip less often into the imitation of the beast. These impulses can come to the intelligent as well as foolish man, but the intelligent man can control them. And in an intelligently administered society, one that returned to the individual in widened powers more than it took from him in restricted liberty, the advantage of every man would lie in social and loyal conduct. And only clear sight would be needed to ensure peace and order and goodwill. That's all. Only a clear vision, only an enlightened person, only an enlightened mind, only a refinement of culture, we can say. Only that would require peace and order, and only that would require to maintain peace and order and goodwill. Not all these beliefs and all these hundreds of gods and goddesses and fear, etc. So, again I repeat, this is so important. In an intelligently administered society, one that returned to the individual in widened powers more than it took from him in restricted liberty. See the language. The advantage of every man would lie in social and loyal conduct. And only clear sight, clear vision would be enough to ensure peace in the society. That's all. Nothing else is required. But unfortunately, if the government itself is a chaos and absurdity, like we have seen, if it rules without helping, commands without leading, how can we persuade the individual in such a state to obey the laws and confine his self-seeking within the circle of the total good? See how he puts it. It is unbelievable, his language. Because if the government itself is chaos, if there is nobody at the top who really wants the good of the citizens, how can you persuade the individual man to obey the law and confine his desires, confine his self-seeking, he says, within the circle of total good? He will not confine himself when there is chaos all around. And there is no wonder there is chaos where there is no thought. No thought means no mature thought. And the crowds decides in haste and ignorance to repent at leisure and in desolation. See the words. The crowd decides in haste and ignorance to repent at leisure and in desolation. Is it not a base superstition that mere numbers will give wisdom? Have 1,000 Supreme Court members. Will it give wisdom? Will it give any lasting, any good rule or law, or any good will come of that? On the contrary, is it not universally seen that men in crowds are more foolish and more violent and more cruel than men who are separate and alone? It is there. Each man is going peacefully, one person comes and incites them all. Then what happens? People lose their rationality. This is called mob mob mentality, we all know. Then all persons lose their common sense. Is it not shameful that men should be ruled by orators who go ringing like brazen pots, which, when struck, continue to sound till a hand is put upon them? Go on talking nonsense till someone stops you. Surely the management of a state is a matter for which men cannot be too intelligent. It has to be the highest intelligence. A matter that needs the unhindered thought of the finest minds. How can a society be saved or be strong except it be led by its wisest men? See how the picture has been painted, in what a way. I mean, unbelievable. Now, all these thoughts of Socrates, naturally, the powers which ruled that so-called democracy did not like. It is but natural. This fellow has come to destroy all these things. We have been doing this for so long. He does not believe in our gods and all those people who are leading the mob. Generally, what happens? One person leads the whole mob. So naturally, those persons would see our power will go, all the selfish interest and all that. So naturally, he was disliked. So then there was a war between those who upheld this democracy and the aristocrats. And unfortunately, those who upheld this kind of ridiculous democracy, they won. And Socrates had been denouncing them all through. So it was decided by these people that Socrates should die. So another view is that Socrates was, it seems, a scapegoat for Athens' disappointment. Previously the city was strong, but there were so many wars, it had been overrun by its enemies. People were starving. And with this ideology of democracy itself in question, then the Athenians took a more fundamentalist view. A confident society can ask questions of itself, but when it is fragile, it fears those questions. When we don't have faith in our own institutions, people are afraid to question all these. If a person questions all these things. So Socrates' famous aphorism, "The unexamined life is not worth living," was beginning to jar everybody because they did not want to examine. They were fearful that if we really examine, the whole thing would fall apart. So, therefore, Socrates was tried. The trial of Socrates, 399 BC, was held to determine the philosopher's guilt of two charges. First, impiety against the gods of Athens and corruption of the youth of the state. So, the accuser said Socrates is guilty of failing to acknowledge the gods that the city acknowledges. We all acknowledge those gods. Who is this fellow? And introducing new deities whom we don't want. So, the death of Socrates, the death sentence of Socrates was the consequence of his asking politico-philosophical questions of his students, which resulted in the two accusations of moral corruption and impiety. So 3 persons were there who were mainly responsible for the accusations. First was Anytus, Anytus, then Lycon, these are names of persons, Lycon, then Meletus, Meletus. They brought the accusation in a writ before a tribunal of the people on behalf of the demagogues, orators, and poets, etc. Demagogues, who were demagogues? They were political. Their demagogue is a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than using a rational argument. Those are called. So, on behalf of them, these people accused Socrates. So, another viewpoint which says what was the main reason for these false accusations against Socrates? One was that, of course, we have seen. Another psychological point of view is telling, he says, every great man, especially under a democratical government and in a period of moral corruption, excites the envy of others. So people were angry also, but people were envious also. For it is the fate of the truly great to be envied by those who feel their own comparative inferiority. And should he be a man distinguished by unusual moral goodness, as Socrates was, by rare qualities of head and heart, as Socrates was, by a high enthusiasm for virtue and morality, as Socrates had, he is still more in danger of his being misunderstood by his contemporaries. For there are always persons mean enough to suppose, because their own hearts cannot comprehend such virtues, that the low objects of vanity and selfishness which influence their actions also are influencing the actions of these noble persons. Because man judges everybody by his own vision. In Bengali there is a saying, a thief thinks that everybody is a thief. Chor shobai ki chor bhage. So in his intercourse as a teacher of the people with the orators, poets, etc. who now denounced him, Socrates frequently offended them and sometimes injured their interests. And moreover, he lived in a corrupt period. The citizens were actually generally of not a good character then. Plato and other contemporary writers describe the Athenians people in those times as inconstant and frivolous, of a cruel disposition, and ungrateful to those who were truly their well-wishers. Even these people had to suffer. And of course, jealousy. They were also jealous of men who were distinguished by their virtue and superior qualities. So this is one thing, envy, and of course, another cause we have seen, it was hatred, which the selfish people bore towards him, and by the freedom with which he always expressed his opinions. How revolting must it have been to a man of correct habits and thinking like Socrates, that persons assuming the venerable appellation of the wise should have aimed at confounding the fundamental ideas of right and wrong, of virtue and vice. These people are being known as wise, while they themselves have no idea of right and wrong, what is good and bad. But in general, it can be said that it was because he freely expressed what he thought, Socrates made enemies. That is the thing. Now he was tried and we know what happened. But it is interesting to note that even after he was accused and tried and sentenced to death, Socrates, if he wanted, he could have saved himself. After he was convicted, he could have proposed a reasonable penalty. That okay, don't give me the death penalty, give me something which is less. In those days it could be done. Right, today also the convict can appeal. But if he did that, Socrates actually would be admitting his guilt. That have mercy. Yes, I have done something wrong, but that he would not do because he was not guilty. So he refused to avoid his death by leaving Athens. He could have left Athens also. There were many of his followers who could have arranged that. Socrates' decision not to flee is based on the following principle of action expressed in his apology. Apology is his defense. So why did he not flee? He himself says, his own words we have. He said, "You are mistaken, my friend." He said this in quote. "You are mistaken, my friend, if you think that a man who is worth anything ought to spend his time weighing up the prospects of life and death. I am not so shallow that I will tremble at my death," he said. He said, a man who is worth anything, he has only one thing to consider in performing any action. Only one thing. That is, whether he is acting rightly or wrongly. That is all. The consequence he doesn't bother. If I have to do good and the consequence is bad, I don't care. I will do good only. See Sri Ramakrishna's father. He lost everything. From a fairly prosperous farmer, he came to the streets, but he would not compromise truth. These people don't care. Their principles are for which they live and die. So Socrates was tried and he was also given a chance to defend himself. And like his way of teaching, similarly was his defense. He cross-examined his accusers also. One person was accuser Miletus, he was the main person. So Miletus charges him with corrupting the youth. Socrates asks him, "You tell me that I am correcting the youth, corrupting them. Who is it that is helping the youth? You tell me that." So his answer was also in the form of question. So he said, in the same way that we take a horse to a horse trainer to improve it, Socrates wants to know the person to whom we take a young person to educate him. He says, okay, I am corrupting, but who's educating? Can you tell me that? So Miletus did not know what to say, because it was Socrates who was educating them. So from Miletus' silence we know that these people had no case at all, because he had never reflected on these matters. And he was also unaware of his own ignorance. So throughout his defense speech, Socrates repeatedly stressed that a human being must care for his own soul more than anything else. Socrates found that his fellow citizens cared more for wealth, reputation, and their own pleasures and neglected their souls. He believed that his mission from the God was to examine his fellow citizens He had that notion that he was a divinely ordained person. He had come with a mission. And his mission was to examine his fellow citizens and persuade them that the most important good for a human being was the health of his soul, not only of his body. Wealth, he insisted, does not bring about human excellence. Just by becoming rich. So, wealth does not bring human excellence or virtue, but virtue makes wealth and everything else good for human beings. Similarly, Swami Vivekananda has said, he said, does money make men? Or it is men who make money. টাকা মানুষ করে না মানুষ টাকা করে? Socrates believes, in his defense, that he says that it is obvious that he believes that his mission of caring for souls extends to the entirety of the city of Athens. He thus attempts to show that he is not guilty of impiety, precisely because everything he does is a service to God. Socrates characterizes himself as a gadfly. Gadfly means those flies which sit on animals and continue to irritate them. No, we have seen that when a cow is there, cow waves its tail. So many insects are sitting. So he compares himself to a gadfly in the city as a sluggish horse. He says the horse is sleeping, sluggish, so I am coming to wake it up. So he says, without philosophical inquiry, the democracy becomes stagnant and complacent, in danger of harming itself and others. Just as the gadfly is an irritant to the horse, but rouses it to action, so Socrates supposes that his purpose is to agitate those around him so that they wake up and begin to examine themselves. He asserts that while his contemporaries aim at gratification, that is self-gratification, he practices the true political craft because he aims at what is best. He says, yes, it is true, I am irritating you with my questions, my denunciations, but I am doing it only for your own good, not for my sake. I don't want anything. I don't want political power. I don't want wealth. I don't want name or fame. But naturally, his defense was of no use. The majority of the jurors voted to convict him of these two charges. Then, consistent with the common legal practice, voted to determine his punishment. They said that the sentence of death was to be carried out. Socrates should be executed by drinking a poisonous beverage of hemlock. So after this had been pronounced, Socrates knew that he was going to die. Socrates, after that also, he once more addressed the judges who had condemned him. And with great resignation, he spoke of the evil which they inflicted upon themselves by his punishment. He did not say, cry and shout that, oh, what have you done to me? I am going to die, etc. No. He said, you cannot do me any harm. You are harming yourself. So he spoke of the evil which those accusers inflicted upon themselves by his punishment. And to those who had voted for his acquittal, some persons had voted for his acquittal also. He spoke upon subjects which at that moment were of the greatest interest. What was those? Death and immortality. The last words of this address are particularly beautiful. They are, he said, by going, he said, however, it is time for us to go, for me to die, for you to live. But which of them is better is unknown to all except to God. I am going to die, you are going to live, his accusers. But which of them is better, my death or your life? The kind of wretched life you are leading. Which is better? Only God knows. See, I mean, absolutely wonderful. So after Socrates had spoken these words, he went with cheerfulness to the prison where death awaited him. And those who have read his life, they know what happened after that, because Plato wrote it down. As Will Durant says, Plato wrote it down in prose, which is more beautiful than poetry. So it is all there. So what did Plato say? So we should remember that these people who had accused him, they had the power to pardon him also. But Socrates disdained to make the appeal. He did not care. He said, I will not lower myself. I will not grovel before these persons. And this was a singular confirmation of his theories, Will Durant says, that the judges should wish to let him go while the angry crowd voted for his death. Had he not denied the gods? Then he says, see the language. Woe to him who teaches men faster than they can learn. If you are far ahead of your time, if you teach men faster they can learn, this will happen to you. So Socrates was to die by drinking the hemlock. Now I will quote from Plato, his last days. So Socrates' friends came to his prison, offered him an easy escape. They had bribed all the officials who stood between him and liberty, but Socrates refused. He said, be of good cheer, he told his sorrowing friends, and say that you are burying my body only, not my soul. When he had spoken these words, says Plato, in one of the great passages of the world's literature, I quote Plato, he arose and went into the bath chamber with Crito, was one of his followers, who bade us wait, and we waited, talking and thinking. The greatness of our sorrow, he was like a father of whom we were bereaved. We were being bereaved, and we were about to pass the rest of our lives as orphans. Now the hour of sunset was near, for a good deal of time had passed while he was within. When he came out, he sat down with us again, but not much was said. Soon the jailer entered and stood by him, saying, to you, Socrates, whom I know to be the noblest and gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place, I will not impute the angry feelings of other men. Indeed, I am sure that you will not be angry with me, for others as you are aware, and not I, are the guilty ones. And so fare you well, and try to bear lightly what must needs be. You know my errand. What was the errand? To bring Socrates that cup of poison. Then, bursting into tears, the jailer turned away and went out. So Socrates just looked at him and said, I return your good wishes and will do as you bid. Whatever you tell, I will do. I will drink the poison. So there are many other things also, but we are running out of time. So now I'll just quote another what happened after that. So they had the whole day. You say, Socrates. It depended on Socrates whether he could take the poison immediately or wait for a few hours. So one of his followers said, the sun is still upon the hilltops. So you can even delay your taking the poison. You don't have to take it now. So Socrates said, yes, and they of whom you speak are right in doing thus. Those who delay their inevitable death. They are right, for they think they will gain by their delay. But I am right in not doing thus. I will not do that. For I do not think I should gain anything by drinking the poison a little later. I should be sparing and saving a life which is already gone. And I could only laugh at myself for this. Just a few hours more, what difference does it make? So, please bring me the poison. So when Crito heard this, he made a sign to the servant. The servant went in, returned with the jailer, carrying the cup of poison. Socrates asked the jailer, now tell me, what should I do? So jailer said, after drinking the poison, just walk about a little until your legs are heavy. Then you lie down, then the poison will act. So he handed the poison to Socrates. And Socrates, in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes, took the cup and said, I must pray to the gods to prosper my journey from this to the other world. May this, then, which is my prayer, be granted to me. Then, holding the cup to his lips, quite readily and cheerfully, he drank the poison. This was the way in which this great person accepted death, as if life and death were all the same to him. So, many interesting other things are also there, but I will not be tempted because we have already crossed our time. So let us end here. Maybe on some other occasion, when we discuss Plato, maybe we can see what he had written, more things about those days. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna